For last time. There we go. All right. So I spend a lot of time, as most of you do, I imagine, on baseball reference. Um, and I stumbled across this guy, Frank Abercrombie, who both alphabetically and chronologically is listed as the first major leaguer born in Oklahoma. Um, so I was interested in that, and then kind of fell down a rabbit hole for a while and put together a short little presentation on uh, some stuff I found out about him that I found to be interesting. And the reason why this ends in a question mark we will get to at the end. Um, but here you see on the left and right there pictures of Frank Abercrombie, and in the middle is the a picture of the Troy Haymakers from 1871, um, a team for which he played, which we will get to shortly. Abercrombie was born in January 1850 in Fort Towson, Oklahoma. Um, it was Indian territory back then. It wasn't a state yet. Um, and you see in a map on the map there, Fort Towson, pretty close to the Oklahoma-Texas border, also fairly close to Arkansas. Um, its original purpose for being built in that location was to help sort of alleviate border disputes between residents of the Arkansas Territory, residents of the Republic of Texas, and residents of Indian Territory. Um, it was built in 1824 and was the site of the last surrender of Confederate land forces during the Civil War, which I thought was interesting. It was a group of, I believe it was Creek Indians fighting for the Confederacy, who formally surrendered there. Um, the fort itself was named after Nathan Towson, a hero of the War of 1812. Um, and here's one of the more interesting nuggets I found. Frank Abercrombie's father, John, was a brigadier general in the United States Army and fought in the Civil War at the ripe old age of 63. I wanted to fall down another rabbit hole to see if I could find anyone older who was a combat veteran of a American war, but that's got to be close to a record. Um, after growing up in Oklahoma and spending some time in Arkansas, he went to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, where he played baseball. Um, and as luck would have it, there was another group playing baseball in Troy, New York at this time, um, the Troy Haymakers, which was a team that was established in 1860 as the Union Baseball Club Lansingburg, which was a small suburb or a village north of Troy that later became part of Troy proper. And then the team changed its name accordingly. Um, in 1871, as most of us know, was the first year of the National Association, and Troy was a founding member. Um, although there are records going back that some of the players on this team were on the payroll, so to speak, going as far back as 1865. So, yeah, professional baseball as it's codified, but it had been professional for years prior. Um, in their inaugural season, they finished 13, 15, and 1 and were led by two player managers, Lipman Pike, who's pictured there on the left, the first notable Jewish baseball player, and Bill Craver. There's a park, Knickerbacker Park. I had to triple check that to make sure it was correct. Knickerbacker Park in Troy was the site of the home grounds of the Troy Haymakers from 1871 to 1872, and the National League's Troy Trojans from 1880 to 1881. This monument here was built in the early 90s to honor those two teams and Troy's two native Hall of Famers, King Kelly and Johnny Evers. What you might find interesting is this plaque that lists the team members of the Haymakers has him listed as David Abercrombie. Um, this was something that wasn't noticed and corrected until fairly recent. Um, there was a prominent resident of Troy at the time named David Abercrombie, and when Frank played, wires got crossed and they just assumed it was him. Anyone who's frequented Baseball Reference and looks at the old teams around this time, you see names with a lot of question marks off to the side. So they weren't exactly fastidious about record keeping back then. They had bigger fish to fry. His first and only major league appearance was October 21st, 1871. He played shortstop for the normal shortstop Dickie Flowers and batted seventh. The game was against the Chicago White Stockings. He went 0 for 4 at the plate. In the field, recorded 3 assists, 1 putout, and 2 errors. 2 days later was their next home game and their final game of the season. Flowers took back over. It's an interesting question, Hank. I'll have to look into that. I think etymologically, haymaker comes from like the motion used, and how it became known as a punch. But that's an interesting side tangent for me to fall down. But yeah, he'd only played in the one game. Flowers took back over. They ended the season. He went back to school, finished his degree. There we go. Yeah, 1872 was their final season in the National Association, and as I said, it was played without Abercrombie. After he graduated, he went into work as a civil engineer in the state of Pennsylvania, and at one point worked his way up to being the superintendent of the New York division of the Pennsylvania Railroad. He moved to Philadelphia after retiring and died on Veterans Day 1939 at the ripe old age of 89. And he is buried at St. Thomas Episcopal Church in White Marsh, PA, just outside of Philadelphia. This picture isn't of Frank, it is of his father, the Brigadier General, who was a borderline senior citizen fighting in the Civil War. I just wanted to throw that in there. And here's where I get to the sort of questions. Like I said, Abercrombie appears first chronologically and alphabetically on Baseball Reference when you search for players born in the state of Oklahoma. But the 1850 census recorded him as an infant, but born in Arkansas. But his birth certificate listed it officially as Fort Towson, Oklahoma. Or Fort Towson, Indian Territory. My assumption is because Oklahoma wasn't a state, and I believe Arkansas was. By this time, some wires got crossed, and they put him in Arkansas for the purposes of the census.
This is a little bit of kind of inside baseball, but many portions of Indian Territory who did not have a civil law system were put under Arkansas law well before statehood. That doesn't mean Arkansas had jurisdiction. It means that if the question was, what's a valid divorce, they would apply the law of Arkansas because the tribal law only applied to tribal members. So if you had a non-tribal member living in what became Indian Territory, you needed some sort of civil law to apply to them. So that's another reason why they might have listed him as from Arkansas. Who knows?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Area was the session when they the removal that was part of Arkansas before the removal, and Arkansas ceded that far eastern part of the state.
I believe that might also be part of the same reason why, if you look at the Arkansas border, it kind of juts out to the west past Fort Smith. And I believe reading something years ago about that is it was, ceded land to build Fort Smith so that they could build it in Arkansas Territory or what have you. So that all makes sense there. Oh, okay.
I'm trying to remember what year that was, and I don't remember offhand.
But yeah, so for my purposes, just based on the research I did, which may not have been as exhaustive as it could have been, but I'm gonna count it, and if it's good enough for Baseball Reference, it's good enough for me. But I thought what was interesting was there's a significant gap, as you would probably imagine, for the second player born in Oklahoma who appeared in the major leagues. The next player was Ben High Pockets Hunt, who was born in 1888. and started his major league career in 1910 with the Boston Red Sox. He had, compared to Frank, a significantly longer career. He was in the majors for several years, but what I'm gonna finish with is that I'm gonna assume Frank was the first. Let's see, I can get out here. There we go. All right, so that was all I had. Like I said, just a little short and sweet. Something kind of piqued my interest about Oklahoma's first major leaguer, and I'm always interested by these guys who only appear in one game or only get one hit or what have you. I believe SABR has a book coming out about was it pitchers who only pitched in one game, which that might be interesting as well.
I think it's pitchers who won one game.
That's right.
Wonders.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned him.
Go ahead.
I'm glad you mentioned him because we now know where he's buried. The official, if you look at Baseball Reference, it just shows him as cremated, but I just found him on Find a Grave. It has him listed as Francis, which was actually his first name rather than Frank. And he's in a church cemetery in White Marsh, Pennsylvania, maybe. Doesn't have a picture of the marker, so until I see a picture of a marker or get confirmation from the cemetery, I don't necessarily believe that. But official SABR records, we don't know. According to those, we don't know where he's buried, but that does seem to be, at least a possibility. And it shows his death certificate, and it shows it lists him as being a ball player. One problem with 1871 is there are some people who don't consider pre-1875 to be major league.
Yeah.
I personally do, but I'm not the final arbiter of such things.
Yeah, again, like if Baseball Reference says it's official, that's good enough for me. I think that's fair. In the presentation, they only played a total of 30 some odd games that year, so it's a little. I mean, I'll listen to an argument to the contrary, but I'll stick with 1871 as well.
The previous voice of authority was the Sporting News, and Fink did not recognize the National Association, nor did he recognize the Union Association as major league. And Union Association probably is definitely right, but
there's sort of an epistemological problem there, which is similar to the question of was he born in Oklahoma, which is that someone who was born, say, where I'm sitting right now in 1895 was born in Indian Territory. But we say, what's now Oklahoma? But if you think about it, for example, Kansas Territory extended way off into Colorado. And, someone born in Denver and, before Colorado Territory was organized I guess you could argue whether they were from Colorado or Kansas or.
Jesse, could you let me share my screen for a second?
Yeah, sure. Let's see.
There's a setting that should say allow others to share screen.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
That's what I thought it was right here. Okay, you should be good.
Okay. That's his death certificate. It says he was born in Texas.
Huh.
Oh, really?
Now, death certificates can be spectacularly wrong because it depends on who they're getting that information from.
Does this list the informant? Sometimes they do on the let's say who the informant is.
See.
Well, it lists a spouse, so that's.
Yeah, I'm not seeing where it says.
There it is.
Oh yeah, Mrs. Coleman. I have no idea who Mrs. Clinton Coleman was.
Yeah,
absolutely no idea.
That could just be a neighbor or something.
It could be the lady that owned the boarding house he was living in at the time, or something like that. And maybe based on his accent, she thought he was born in Texas. I mean, that could
Maybe
be all it is.
maybe he just talked real big, so she thought he was from Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
there was a lot. There was a lot
Yeah.
of misinformation or this, that, and the other. Like it said, Baseball Reference listed him as cremated, but then I was able to do a little digging and find that the thing in White Marsh that you alluded to, and then the yeah, where was he born, and then the census versus a birth certificate versus his death certificate, which I did not access. So, but then again, it's 1871. You know, there's record keeping was not as good as it was in 1971 or even today. So, but yeah, it
Yeah,
definitely
I have
makes those
found
more interesting.
I have found many mistakes in the U.S. Census reports from the 1920s and 30s in doing my own research. So, by the way, this is not directly baseball related, but since you mentioned the senior citizen of the Civil War, there's a motocross racer named Malcolm Smith who's still alive today. He's in his 80s. He's in the movie On Any Sunday. You may have seen that. He used to race with Steve McQueen. Anyway, he's still alive. He's like 85 years old. His father was born during the Civil War.
Wow.
That seems incredible to me that there could be a person alive today whose father was born during the Civil War. His father was 80 years old when he was born.
And didn't just recently one of the grandsons of President Franklin Pierce recently die?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, that's some real old people having some kids who lived a real long time.
Yeah.
It's President John Tyler who still has a living
That's right.
grandson.
Oh, is it John Tyler? Not Pierce.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tyler
Yeah,
was born in 1790, and he's got a living grandson.
Yeah, I think there were two, and one of them did die recently, I
Yeah,
think. Yes.
Yeah.
He's in they're both in their 90s.
Yeah.
Malcolm's mother, by the way, thought that Malcolm's father was 50 years old when she had a child with him. He was a little deceptive about his age. He was actually 80 years old. Apparently, he was an outdoor guy, very physically fit, good looking, and rugged. And, you know,
If somebody who's 80 can pass off as 50, they're doing pretty good.
Yeah. Good for him. Yeah.
Yeah. They met on a mountain hike in the mountains. So,
wow.
Anyway, that's not baseball related. Sorry. So.
Still
it's
a good
amusing.
nugget. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Fred, if you want to go ahead and give your presentation, you've already got ability to share your screen, so you should be able to pretty seamlessly if you want to go ahead.
Okay. All right. I shared last time about just the general grave hunting that I've been doing. And so today I thought it'd be fun to look at Oklahoma. Sadly, most of the really cool stories that I have nothing to do with Oklahoma. Most of the Oklahoma ones have been relatively straightforward. But there's still some interesting people, and I'll talk about some of those. Let's see. There we go. But before I do that, just recap of what I've been doing recently over Christmas. I got 96 more graves in Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey, and I got Maryland on there twice. Okay, there weren't many in Maryland, but anyway, I didn't get a chance to proofread this after I got it put together. I drove 5,430 miles to do it. One problem right now in most parts of the country, I have to put on a lot of miles to get not many graves because except for California, Oregon, Washington, New York, and Pennsylvania, every other state at some point I had completed all of the then known graves. And so when we find out, well, when the Negro Leagues became recognized as major leagues, that added a bunch, but not a lot in any one particular spot. They're spread out all over. And then other people that now we finally know where this guy is buried or somebody dies. So when I do go back to those places, I have maybe, well, one trip I'll be talking about in a little bit. I'll be going to Texas and getting 20 graves in Texas. And Texas has a lot of driving. But I did a few more around Tulsa, and I got one done by proxy. Eagle, Alaska. You get 5 points if you know where that is. Charlie Fisher, the only ball player buried in Alaska. If you look at the vertical eastern border of Alaska with Canada, it's right. Well, yeah, it's right there. I mean, it's at the end of a 160-mile long dead end road. And there was a woman up there very kindly has taken a picture of the area. I don't have a picture of a marker. I don't think there is one. She thinks there is, but she does know where he's buried. And I've allowed her to visit as my proxy because I'm never going to get up to Eagle, Alaska personally. That's not happening. But that's now 49 states and Washington, D.C., and one in England, which was also done by proxy. Ken Caminiti is the other one that Craig Biggio took the pictures that I have for Ken Caminiti's grave because it's on the ranch that he and Caminiti co-owned. And I told him, you just let me know when you want me there. I'll be there. He said, no, I'm not going to let you on the ranch to show it to you. But if you promise never to publish the pictures, I'll send you some, which he very kindly did. And I am not going to publish them. And since you're recording this, I'm not going to show them on here either because that would effectively be publishing them. So I'm going to respect that privacy. But that puts me up to 9,667 total graves in 4,256 cemeteries. My son was wondering about that. Is there anybody on the planet who has been to more cemeteries than you have? I don't know. But I'd guess there aren't many. 2,886 different cities, 215 Hall of Famers. Coming up in March, we've got a long weekend break in March, and so I'm going to finish all the known ones in Oklahoma. I've got 6 more cemeteries and 7 more graves, several of them in the Oklahoma City area. One is about 90 miles west of Oklahoma City. Right now, I can't remember the name of the town, but I'll get those. And then over spring break, I'll go down to Texas and get 23 more cemeteries. Oh, well, actually 22, because one of the ones that we thought was buried, we knew where he was buried. We just found out he's not. That's one problem with this. A lot of the numbers keep moving. In fact, I've had times where I have one day found out that I had gone to fewer baseball graves than I realized, because there have been about 6 times that we had a guy we thought was the major leaguer. I visited his grave. We later found out the guy never played Major League ball. That happens more than you would think. Although obviously back in the early years of baseball, obviously. And they're all that'll leave 3 cemeteries, one in Lubbock, one in Amarillo, and one, not Lubbock. Can't remember the name of the town. One in Amarillo, one in El Paso. Those take a pretty lengthy drive to get to those. In May and June, I'm going to be going to New York. 282 cemeteries, 554 graves, give or take a little bit. Number 300 on that trip will be Emmett Ashford. Actually, it's going to be 301 now that I lost that one in Texas. And he's buried in Cooperstown. And a friend of mine has told me that he wanted to do video documentation of my 10,000th grave. And so I'm going to have it be Emmett Ashford in Cooperstown. I mean, what better place to do your 10,000th grave than in Cooperstown? I have no idea if the folks at the Baseball Hall of Fame will care, though I guarantee you I will check to see if they care.
Fred, a question occurs to me. What you obviously have these very planned out, right? You have a route drawn out and everything.
I'm working on it, yeah.
I remember one time in a math class being forced to figure the best route for a delivery truck to take.
The traveling salesman problem.
Yeah, there was basically no good solution. So is there such a thing as a best solution to some of these, or do you just go for it?
What I do is I've got some software that Microsoft no longer supports, but fortunately still runs on my laptop. Google Maps has something similar, but not as good. It allows me to display all of the cemeteries I'm planning on going to. And I can look at them on a map, and based on eyeballing it, I can pick a route. Now, in most states, that works well. In some states, especially the more rural areas, it might not work real well because I might think, well, obviously, I can go from here to here. No, you actually can go from here, way down to here, way back up to there, because there's no place else to cross the river. So sometimes I had a problem like that in Montana, because there just aren't good ways. But I don't use any nice algorithm like they were hoping you'd find when you were taking that class. Yeah, it's a challenging problem. I may also got about 50 more graves in New England that I may go to, and also in New England, in Massachusetts, Westfield, Massachusetts, the best pierogies I've ever found. So I'm going to try to make a stop in Westfield, Massachusetts to get some more pierogies. Next spring, I'm hoping to get to Pennsylvania, get a lot of those. And then in May and June of 2025, I'm hoping to get along the West Coast, which at that point would mean I have them all done, at least except for the stragglers or more recent discoveries. And that'll put me at about 12,000 graves, which is a lot. But after that, I'll have to just go various areas to clean up the rest of the ones that I didn't know about at the time, or that we've recently discovered, or people who have died since I was there last. But Oklahoma, of the now the ranks I'm giving here are based on the graves that I have been to. I'm not making any claims that Oklahoma has the 20th most major league graves. That is not what I'm saying. But of the ones I visited, Oklahoma ranks 20th at 184. 109 of those were major leaguers, which ranks 23rd. It is the fewest graves of the ones with at least 100. After that, 109 drops down into the 90s for whoever's next. I don't remember who that is. There's one who was a coach, 2 who are umpires, 64 minor leaguers. I don't usually do minor leaguers unless they are convenient. But since I was living in Arkansas for most of this time, I did minor leaguers in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, and Missouri, because those are easy. Those were relatively easy for me to get to from Arkansas. 2 minor league umpires and 6 Negro leaguers. Now, when I say a coach, I've been to a whole lot more that were coaches. Joe Fraser, who I'll talk about more later, I have him listed as a player. He was a manager. I only list them as one of the things. And if they were a player, I list them as a player. So on my list, Connie Mack is not listed as a manager. He's listed as a player, because that's my highest priority category. And so if somebody's listed as a coach, then they did not play Major League Ball. They did not manage Major League Ball, but they coached. So that's whether that's the best way to categorize them or not, I don't know, but that's the way I'm doing it. And it's my data, so I get to do whatever I want. But that's where they are. And you see, this is the software that I use, Hank, to do this. So I can plot them out, and I can have it so that I can see the names of every single one of them. So as I'm working on figuring out the best route, I can use that.
Yeah, that font has 1985 written all over it.
Yeah, and it works. But around 2005, 2009, I think it was, they stopped supporting it. But like I said, thankfully it's still running on my laptop, so it sure makes it easy for me. Google Maps, I can put those push pins on there on Google Maps, but I can't have all of the names displayed simultaneously, which really, really helps me when I'm trying to plot out the road. Now, you notice I don't have the very, very northwesternmost part of Oklahoma up there. That's because there's nobody there. And not just ball players. I'm not sure anybody actually lives there. It's pretty rural, from my understanding. But I'm going to go through just some of them, and I'll give you my particular reasons. Some of them are, maybe we'll be talking about Hall of Famers. There are 4 of them. I'll also talk about some more personal reasons. Some who are just real good ball players. Dale Mitchell, and I included this one because I just like the name Cloud Chief, Oklahoma. I just think that's a cool name for a town. I put Don Larson up there because he is the final out of the perfect game in the World Series. I still don't think that pitch was a strike, although the umpire thought it was, and the umpires were always right. But he played mostly for Cleveland and a little bit he really wasn't with Brooklyn long. He was with the Dodgers only half the season, and yet he ended up being one of the most famous moments of the 56 World Series. Jerry Adair, I have him because I mean, the 60s is when I was growing up and falling in love with baseball, and I just happen to remember him from those years, so I like him. He was the good field, no hit kind of middle infielder that still could get a job back in those days. I don't think anybody like that exists anymore. But he's in Sand Springs, Oklahoma. Ben Tincup, I thought this one was interesting because he played from 1914 to 15, then 1918, and then he didn't play again in the major leagues till 1928. And I always see ones like that. I know some like that. They only played 10 years later because they were coaching for somebody and the team was shorthanded. So they inserted themselves into the lineup. I don't know if that's the case with him or not. I didn't take the time to research that. But Rose Hill in Tulsa has a pretty good number of burials there. Bugs Bennett or Bugs Morris, depending on which name you want to use. I have him because I work in Bartlesville, so that's the reason I thought this one was interesting. That's one thing that we've had problems with some ball players. When they start changing their names, we don't necessarily know where they're going to be, what the name is, where they're buried. There's one that's in Alabama. He's listed in baseball records as Paul Wojie. His actual name was Wojciechowski, but I'm guessing some sports writer at some point didn't feel like spelling that and said, hey, your name is now something else. But he's listed in the cemetery in Mobile, Alabama as the Wojciechowski. So sometimes that can make it hard to find people. Cot Deal, there's another reason I'll give near the end about why I have him included. The guy had a long career in baseball. He was involved with baseball for something like 60 years. He played for a while. He coached a lot, and then scouting. I think he scouted until pretty much just before he died. And he's in Rose Hill Burial Park in Oklahoma City. I mentioned Joe Frazier earlier. Like I said, I do have him listed as a player, not as a manager, even though that's how I'm definitely much more. I mean, he finished playing before I was born. And I spent a lot of painful times watching the 77 Mets. He didn't make the whole season in 77. He was done after about a little over a quarter of the season, I believe. He was invited to find other opportunities.
Fred, Joe Frazier's son, Marty, was my good friend of mine in high school.
Oh, okay.
He is now retired and lives in Broken Arrow. And if you guys would be interested in having him come on and just talk sometime about what it was like growing up as the son of a player and coach and stuff. Of course, he was born in 55, so he didn't see his father play in the majors much. But
yeah,
he's a well-spoken guy. He's a West Point grad, served in the Army for many years.
I would enjoy that. In Arkansas one time, we had Sal Magley's son as a guest. And it does give a unique perspective. I actually asked Sal Magley's son, hey, I've heard your father was very protective of home plate and that if his mother had crowded the plate, he would have probably hit his mother. Is that true? And his son just sort of sat there quietly for a moment and said, yeah, that's true. So yeah, if you're looking for a vote, I'll vote yes. I would enjoy that. I haven't been in Oklahoma long, but I've heard that Bixby is well known for things other than baseball, at least when it comes to high school sports in Oklahoma. They seem to be a pretty fair football program. Jim Beecham, I have him because I just love Jim Beecham. He wasn't with the Mets long, and his career with the Mets wasn't exactly great, but for some reason, I think he had a couple big pinch hits early in his time with the Mets, and so that's why a lot of us really started to like him. I found out where he is. His ashes are scattered on Jim Beecham Field in Grove, and I found that out from his son. I found his son on Facebook. I contacted him, and he was gracious enough to respond to me and tell me what was done with the remains. So when I can identify the spot where the ashes are scattered, I count that. Cliff Mapes, he's famous because his number 7 was retired by the New York Yankees. Yeah, maybe because of somebody else more than Cliff Mapes, but I mean, hey, his number was retired by the Yankees. And it's hard to see it weather is not my friend a lot of times when I travel. And the day I was there, it was rainy, so it's hard to see on the top right-hand side of the gravestone. It does show, it says New York Yankees, and it does show him swinging a bat. I don't know if it's actually him or not, but I enjoy baseball related engravings on the stones, especially when they're not just a generic guy with a bat, but they're more specific like that one. Oh, I can't remember the other guy's name. There was another guy who wore 7 between Mapes and the guy from Commerce, Oklahoma. But right now I can't remember the other guy's name. Earl Huckleberry, I just had this one because I just remember really finding his name and the cemetery's name I'm using. This was in fairly early, one of my earliest trips into Oklahoma, and I know practically nothing about his career. He only lasted 1 season with Philadelphia, so I have no idea how good he was. But I just thought the name and the name of the cemetery were cool, so that's why I like that one. John McCarthy or McCarty, depending on which way you want to write it. On the gravestone, it's McCarthy, but he often played as McCarty back in 1889. This is a long time ago now. From what Jesse was talking about, I'm guessing he wasn't born in Oklahoma because he played in 1889, which would have been after Abercrombie and before the next one you mentioned. So I'm guessing he was not born here. You can see on his stone, one of the problems that we have with older stones, sometimes they start getting real hard to read for a couple of reasons. I don't know if I'd call it deterioration, but darkening of the stone. And you can see that the vegetation is trying to cover the stone up. So that makes it tough sometimes on some of the older stones and less carefully cared for cemeteries. Ona Dodd, I like this for a couple of reasons. He's married next to his wives. My understanding is that the wives were sequential, not concurrent. That would be a very interesting story if that were true. But I'm guessing that the person that founded the name of the town in which he's buried was named Porter, and they just took the name and wrote it backwards for the name of the town.
That's how the town was named.
Is that
Three Drops in southwestern Oklahoma? And there, it was known as Porter, but at statehood, there's a conflict of postal service. Post office wanted it changed, so they just threw it backwards. Three Drops.
Oh, okay. So I was right that somebody. I mean, that spelling. I mean, it had to be Porter backwards. Just had to be. But he played just a little bit in Pittsburgh in 1912. And there is no individual marker for him or his wives. It's just I was told that that's where he and they all were. I say all. I don't know how many wives it was. I think it was only 2, but that might be an interesting story to study. Guy Cantrell, this one's interesting because sometimes names change. The town he was buried in doesn't exist anymore. Ludi, Oklahoma, I believe was the name of the town because it's the Ludi Cemetery. That is now part of Wilburton. And that actually created some problems for me trying to find the cemetery because I was looking for, the old town name. And I couldn't. So things just weren't working until I finally found out that Wilburton had grown and swallowed up the previous town. Okay, come on. George Barr, he was an umpire for a long time, 19 years. And he was the first umpire I visited in Oklahoma, one of the first umpires I visited, period. Because the first sources that I had for where graves were did not include umpires. And so I won't say he was the very first umpire I visited, but he was one of them. Ed Klepfer, he had an interesting career. I was curious about him. His first 3 seasons, he didn't do much. The next 2 seasons, he did really well. And the next season, he was completely out of baseball. The year after that, he played 5 games with a 7.36 ERA, and then he was done. presumably there were some arm issues. But I just always find it interesting when you have a guy have a really, really good year and then the next year he's gone. Now, with some of them, I know that was back in the days of the Pacific Coast League, back when that possibly could have been another major league, and people were getting paid really, really well to go out there. So he may have played out there for a year, or may have been an arm injury. But there's his crypt in Rose Hill in Tulsa. Yeah, I wish I had time to investigate all the interesting stories about, or the interesting things about people's careers. They may end up not being interesting stories, but I do get curious about a lot of those. Danny Thompson, I remember this one very well because this was back in the days when I still used film, and I took 7 pictures of his grave because the wind was blowing so hard in Capron, Oklahoma. I don't know if that's how they pronounce it or not. That I wasn't sure I had stayed still to take the picture. So I ended up taking 7 of them, hoping one of them would end up being clear. It turns out 6 of the 7 were good. So I wasted almost half a roll of film on one guy. But I do remember him back from when he played. I remember him on Stratomatic cards. For those who remember playing Stratomatic back in the day. Not a great player, but he lasted in the major leagues for 7 seasons. You can't be bad. This one was special to me because he was buried in Fayetteville National Cemetery in Fayetteville, Arkansas, according to everybody except for Fayetteville National Cemetery. And finally, I got in touch with the funeral directors, and they said the family had tried to bury him in Fayetteville National Cemetery. They announced it and everything, but it wasn't approved because they were never able to find the right paperwork to prove that he was qualified to be buried in one of the national cemeteries. And so for quite a while, I kept looking, trying to find him, and I did eventually find him. He's in Tulsa. I am 90% sure that's his remains there. I know I was in the right mausoleum, and it's not big. I know I was in the right area. I didn't see his name anywhere on that, but if I'm looking for a baseball player and I see that box containing ashes in it, I'm pretty sure that's probably the ball player, especially since I didn't see anything else that had his name on it. If you like baseball names, this has got to be one of the coolest names of all time. Calvin Coolidge, Julius Caesar, Tuskahoma McClish. Notice the engraving on the marker. They have all the middle names on there, at least the initials for them. Memorial Park Cemetery, there are a lot of guys buried in Memorial Park in Oklahoma City. He's another one of those, based on how much he moved around. It doesn't appear he was a great ball player, because great ball players, unless they're just lousy teammates, great ball players don't get traded that quickly. Rogers Hornsby would be an example of the lousy teammate who moved around quite a bit. But he still managed to be in the major leagues for a long, long time. Started in 44, finished in 64. So to be on that many teams, but still managed to be around that long is a testament to, he had to be a pretty fair ball player.
The interesting thing is Calvin Coolidge was not a baseball fan at all. He didn't even like baseball. His wife loved baseball and was a big scorekeeper.
Wasn't he one of the first to throw the first pitch out?
Yeah, he also tried to leave when a game went into extra innings because he thought the game was over after 9 innings. And his wife grabbed him by the coattails and pulled him down and said, "No, Calvin, there's more game to be played."
Yeah. Yeah.
No, Taft was first to throw it out.
Say again?
Taft was the first president.
Was Taft? Okay.
I believe that's what I've read before.
Okay.
I wasn't there.
Really? Yeah. I was asked earlier today, I was talking to somebody about the other graves I visit. I also visit other famous folks. And I sent him a list, and he asked if I'd been to how many of the dead presidents I've not yet visited. And right now the answer is 5. I tried to visit Gerald Ford, but his presidential library in Grand Rapids, Michigan was closed due to COVID when I was up there, so I couldn't get to his. Even though he's not in the museum, he's outside, but they had the grounds closed. And it wasn't a place where I was willing to leave my car for very long. And there are 4 in New York, both Roosevelts, Van Buren, and Chester Arthur, and those are on my agenda for my trip in May. So after May, hopefully I'll have all the dead presidents, except for Ford. Marty Martinez, I had him mainly because he was one of the earliest ones that I did in Oklahoma. I got there before he had a marker, so that's what the patch of dirt and grass is in the upper left picture. The bottom right picture is the marker that's there now. I need to get down there because I told my students that I have not yet found good pizza in Oklahoma. Now, I should qualify by saying I'm originally from New Jersey, so when it comes to pizza, I'm a snob. And I have not yet found really good pizza in Oklahoma. And 2 of my students, twins, told me Skiatook, Oklahoma, has a good pizza place, so I'm going to get there sometime when I get a chance. Jim Walkup, if you go to Baseball Reference and just type in Jim Walkup and hit enter, you'll get 2 choices. And since they're both from Havana, Arkansas, that would tend to make you think, oh, father and son. Well, no, not father and son, cousins. They were 14 years difference in age. The one who's in Oklahoma, in Duncan, is the older one, and he did not play long. But according to him, his younger cousin was a much, much better ball player. But unfortunately, his younger cousin didn't have the discipline that the older cousin had. So the younger cousin had the talent. The older cousin had the personal character to get the most out of his talent. If the younger had that, he might have had a fairly long career. He played about 4 seasons, I believe. The Jim Walkup that's buried in Havana, Arkansas, is buried about 50 feet away from Johnny Sane, who is probably much better known than either Jim Walkup. Ted Blankenship, I just included him. I included some of the next few because they were just pretty good ball players that honestly I wasn't real familiar with. He had a sub 500 win-loss record, but he was with some not terribly strong teams. But he did have 3 straight years with at least 12 wins, and he had 9 career home runs, which, as pitchers go, is pretty good. I also like that grave mark. It makes it a little bit hard to read, but it's just an interesting kind of stone there. Willard Schmidt in Elk City, Oklahoma. I found his 1957 interesting, 10-3, but his ERA was 4.78. There's a guy I've been wanting to believe the last name is Kirst, Kirst or something like that. Back in the 40s, he had a season where his ERA was something like 4.9 and his win-loss record was 10-0, which is how do you do that? I think it shows that the pitcher's win is probably an overrated statistic because there's so much more involved in getting one. But how do you go 10-0 with a 4.9 ERA?
Your relief pitcher.
He did start some.
1 or 2 bad outings will balloon that ERA.
Yeah. I thought it was going to be that simple, but it wasn't just one or two. He had a few times where he was in line to get a loss and his teammates rescued him by scoring some runs after he was out. So yeah, Lou Kretlow, I'll have to admit I'd never heard of the guy, but he played in the major leagues for 10 seasons. His win-loss record 27-47, but if you look at the list of the teams he played for, that wasn't his fault. I mean, the Browns, the Orioles, but they were just 1 year from being the Browns. Kansas City Athletics. I mean, he's played for some bad teams. And again, the guy doesn't stay in the major leagues for 10 years if he's that awful. I mean, I could lose 47 games in the major leagues pitching, but they wouldn't give me the opportunity to try. Rip Radcliffe, he's another one. I honestly did not really know much about him, but he did have a 311 batting average. But interestingly, his OPS plus for the more sabermetric minded folks shows that he was basically a slight average to slightly below average hitter, even though he batted 311. He didn't hit for a lot of power. He didn't draw a lot of walks. But you can't fault him because back in those days, what did they look at with batters? They looked at the batting average. And the guy's batting 311, so he's going to stay in the major leagues for 10 years. Lil Stoner, this is the third one at the same cemetery in Enid. He was actually in the starting rotation for Detroit for 4 years. His record was not particularly impressive, but just seeing somebody manage to be a regular starting pitcher for I don't think the Tigers were awful in the 20s. I mean, they weren't the Yankees, so they weren't winning pennants. But he was pitching consistently for a pretty decent team, so he had to be a fairly strong ball player. But again, a lot of these guys I don't know much about. Jackie Brown, I do remember that name because that was during time I was paying close attention to baseball. And he had a couple pretty strong seasons. 1974, he pitched over 200 innings. And he also has a really cool grade marker. A lot of ball players, as you've seen, have fairly straightforward, fairly simple grade markers. This was one I knew I didn't need to get real good information at the cemetery. With a lot of them, I need good information to know where to go. With his, I was pretty sure I could just drive around the cemetery and look, and I could find it, and I was right. Chad Kimsey. I've never figured out whether games finished is an impressive statistic or not, but he led the league for 3 straight years in games finished. And again, that would have been more important back in the years before the save because relief pitchers would have been used differently. It could be that he was just trying to be used to give the starting pitcher a break and save the bullpen a little bit, and so you let the guy get out there and finish ball games. But he apparently was pretty good at that. Seems like quite a few of the Oklahoma guys played for the Browns. Hank Wise, 1944 through 46, he was a pretty good pitcher. I don't know how much of that could be explained by it being the end of World War II, because 44 and 45, you still had a lot of the better players who were otherwise occupied. And 46, some of those guys just getting back into the swing of things. But he had 3 really good solid seasons. Those would have been for the Cubs. During our earlier discussion, somebody was mentioning people who started off real strong, but then didn't do so well. And Roy Foster is a great example of that. His first year, he was second in the Rookie of the Year voting behind a guy named Munson. His second year, now the batting averages weren't great, but he was a good, solid, productive hitter for the Indians. And then his third year, not so much. And there was no fourth year. That was it. It could have been injuries. I don't know his history. Could just been somebody like Joe Charbonneau. I think of Charbonneau, I don't think it was so much injuries. I think his ego went to his head after his first season, and he thought he was ready for the Hall of Fame already, which he obviously wasn't. Carl Morton I liked because he was a good, solid pitcher for an expansion team. And being a Mets fan and seeing the abuse some of their starting pitchers took the first few years of their existence, guys who weren't bad pitchers. The fact that Morton was fairly successful. He was Rookie of the Year in 1970, 9th in the Cy Young Award voting as a rookie, 27th in the MVP voting as a rookie. He had a pretty good year, and he had 4 years of 15 or more wins. And he's down there in Tulsa. John Bateman, I remembered him well, but that's one of the coolest grave markers that there is. That's another one. You just get into the cemetery and drive around, you'll find him. You don't have to have real good information to find that grave. And I saw it from the side where you see the stitching on the baseball. That's where I first saw it. But I do remember him. He is one of those that I'm guessing was a pretty good defensive catcher, because offensively he was not particularly productive most of his career. Harry Basheen, he was a real good pitcher. 6 straight years of 14 or more wins. He was an all-star twice, earned run champion. That's pretty good win-loss percentage. He did play for the Browns, but most of his career he played for the Cardinals, and in those days they were pretty good. Jim Brewer, in the years where relief pitching started to change dramatically, the Dodgers were at the forefront of that with Ron Peronowski and Jim Brewer. And he had some pretty good years, three different years. His ERA was under 2. One of them, I believe, it was 1.6 something. Whether you're a relief pitcher or not, that's impressive. He was an all-star and a World Series champion. I remember him well from when I was falling in love with baseball. Cy Blanton, another one that until I started doing the grave hunting, I'd never heard of. I did look up some stuff about him, and he was a good, solid pitcher, all-star twice, earned run champion one time, led the league in shutouts twice. Now, the 2 years he led the league in shutouts, he had 4. So it's not like he was Bob Gibson with 10 or 12 or however many Gibson had in 68. But he had more than anybody else. And the times he was playing was a fairly big offensive production era of Major League Baseball. So 4 shutouts would be pretty impressive in those days. Allie Reynolds, really good win percentage, but spending a good portion of his career with the great Yankee teams that he did. That's going to certainly help with that. He never had more than 33% of vote for the Hall of Fame. But every year of his career, except his rookie season, he won at least 11 games. That shows fairly productive pitcher. I like his grave marker. It shows quite a bit about his baseball career. Even though I don't like the Yankees, I do have to admit they have one of the cooler logos in baseball, and they have that on there. They actually have to get permission from Major League Baseball to use that on grave markers. Well, let me phrase that. They're supposed to get permission. They may find a guy who does the engraving who's willing to do it without the permission, but I know sometimes it takes a while for a marker to get in place because they do have to work pretty hard to get that permission. Bobby Mercer, even though I never liked the Yankees, there have been Yankees who I liked, and Mercer was one of those. I liked him a lot. I always felt sorry for him because he was supposed to be the next Mickey Mantle. Tom Tresh was supposed to be the next Mickey Mantle. That didn't work out real well. Then it was Bobby Mercer who was supposed to be the next Mickey Mantle. That didn't work out either, but he was a good ball player. Career OPS of 124 that's a good ball player. And he had productive years with every team he played for. He had a good, solid career. He was never the greatest player out there, but he was a really good, solid player. Rube Foster, this one is interesting to me because this is it may be the first time that I actually talked to family members to find out where they were. I contacted the person who ran the cemetery and asked her if she'd tell me where he was. Well, I'm not sure I should. Let me give you his granddaughter's phone number and you can call her. Okay, I did. And she really appreciated the fact that somebody was still interested in her grandfather. So I was happy to do that. But he did have a pretty good career there. He was a teammate of some guy named Babe Ruth. And he had a pretty solid. Now granted, the ERAs are going to be lower in those days, but 58 and 33 is a pretty good record. But again, when it comes to names like that, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce it right. But Pecoshi, Oklahoma, fairly rural area. He's in the back right corner of the cemetery. So if you're ever near Milton Cemetery there, just go to the back right corner, I believe, and he's back there someplace. Wilcie Moore, I like this one for a couple of reasons. Pitched for a great team. His rookie year was with the 27 Yankees. And obviously he and his family were proud of that, because you see the back of the marker, well, front and back of the marker, both highlight his time with the 2070 Yankees. Hollis, Oklahoma. If you go west of Hollis, you're in Texas. I mean, it's right by the border. I really like the name of the cemetery. There's this cool story behind it. Back early 1900s, I think it was, there was no name for the cemetery. They just probably called it the Hollis Cemetery. And there was a cowboy riding through, might have been the 1800s even. There was a cowboy riding through town, and he was not in good shape. He was really sick, and he ended up dying. They didn't even find out what his name was, so there's a grave there for him, but they had no idea what his name was. But the horse that he came into town on was a really good horse, a fair mount. And because of that, they named the cemetery Fairmount Cemetery. That's one of the few cemeteries where I actually know the history behind the name, and I think that's pretty cool. This one's a little more interesting on the story. Wyandotte, Oklahoma. If you go east of Wyandotte, it won't take very long, just a minute or two before you get to Missouri. We were looking for the cemetery and we could not find it. I went to where the area where it was supposed to be, and I didn't see any cemetery. My wife noticed that there were some lights on in one of the houses, and so she went up to the house and asked, "Can you tell me where the Laughlin Cemetery is?" And they said, "Oh yeah, you go back down to the intersection of the two highways there, and go to the far left corner. Go in there. It's on that property." So this is my first experience of a cemetery on private property, and so we drove across the cattle guard and had to honk the horn to get the cows to get out of the way, driving down the road. Got to the house. I walked up to the house. I knocked on the door, and then a guy came in from around the side, and I told him what we were looking for. And he said, "Oh, yeah, it's over there in the back corner. You can drive across the creek if you want." Okay, I was driving a Malibu, not a pickup truck. So I decided that trying to drive across that creek would not be a good idea. But as you can see, my wife and I walked across the creek and to the back corner of the pasture, and that's where the cemetery was. You see the barbed wire in front of his grave marker. I couldn't get a picture without it because the barbed wire is like 2 inches away from it, trying to keep the cows from knocking it over. He was not a particularly good player, but it was like I said, it was my first experience, as far as I can remember, with a grave on private property like that. I mentioned Cottondeal before. This is his brother, Roy. He played a little bit in the 1940 season for two different minor league teams in the Western Association. His ERA was somewhere around 6. So when it comes to baseball skills, his brother had him and he didn't quite so much. But I got to know him. He after his baseball career went south, he got a PhD in mathematics. And he was a great guy. Good friend. He had a cane made out of a baseball bat. So when he'd come to the math meetings, you'd see this really pleasant old man walking along using his baseball bat cane to get around. And so he's one of the minor leaguers I visited in Oklahoma. So that was totally a personal preference to list him as somebody that I felt like showing here. But he was a great guy. He really was a great guy. And I never met his brother, even though his brother outlived him. But he was a good guy. Pepper Martin. I visited his grave in Oklahoma City, where there are a bunch of people buried. And then a friend of mine contacted me and said, "Hey, Pepper Martin, he's not there anymore." He went to Oklahoma City to visit the grave, and the cemetery told him he's not here. He got moved a week ago. If he had gone 2 weeks earlier, Martin still would have been there, so we might not have found out that he got moved. He died in 1965. His wife died about 45 years later. And when she died, I don't know if it was her wishes or other members of the family wishes, they dug him up and buried both of them in Quinton, Oklahoma. So that was one of my first experiences with a grave being moved from one place to another. And it was moved quite a distance. It wasn't moved just to the other side of town like some of them are. But he was a pretty solid ball player. And I was surprised to find out how little Hall of Fame support he ever got. I mean, he never got more than 17.3%, which to me just seems a little bit strange, but I was not doing the voting. I don't know who all else was being considered in those years, but he never did get much support. Jim Thorpe, if you know anything about the history of that situation, that's a mess. That went, I believe, all the way to the I don't know if it was the U.S. Supreme Court or Pennsylvania Supreme Court, but the family and different wives didn't get along real well. But that vault in Rose Hill in Tulsa is where he was while they were preparing for his burial. Fairly elaborate ceremony that that his tribe was going to have for him. He wasn't a particularly great ball player, but it ended up a miserable family fight, and two towns in Pennsylvania merged and named themselves Jim Thorpe to get the tourist attraction of having him buried there. But that, and I didn't know about this, but I was at Rose Hill, and the guy who was showing me to some of the graves said, "Oh, you like baseball? Well, you'll like this. That's where Jim Thorpe was." And apparently they've kept it empty because there's nobody in there. Even if you're not much of a baseball fan, you've probably heard of this guy. A lot of his people on this meeting are going to be. This was my first Oklahoma visit. There are, I know there are at least 3 states where my first visit was a Hall of Famer. Arkansas, my very first visit was Travis Jackson. Maryland, my first visit was Home Run Baker. And Oklahoma, Hartshorn, Oklahoma. The pictures on the left are his wife's marker and his temporary marker because he was not yet marked when I got there, but there was that temporary marker placed by the funeral home. Then when I went back, it wasn't hard to find him. It's oriented so you see the back of the grave, so you only see the number 21 on the stone, but it's really cool to drive into the cemetery and find the guy by his uniform number. I don't have a close-up on it, but it mentions that he has the most wins of any left-handed pitcher in Major League history, I believe, on the marker. With the way starting pitchers are now used, that record is probably safe. I doubt anybody's ever going to catch that. Carl Hubble. I didn't bother putting anything about their statistics on these guys because I'm pretty sure you all know enough about them. In Meeker, Oklahoma, you drive down Carl Hubble Road or street or avenue or whatever to get to towards the cemetery, and it has his nickname on the grave marker, the meal ticket. Lloyd Wainer, his brother's in Florida, but when I was going to find his, I saw something interesting that it has nothing to do with baseball. But as I was driving back to get to Wayner's grave, I passed a marker where the name was D''EATH. I'm sure that's some ethnic name, but to see a grave marker that said death on it just seemed a little bit strange to me. I don't know what nationality that name came from, and I'm sure it doesn't mean that in that language, but that's one of my main memories of that cemetery. That's Lloyd Wainer. Joe McGinnity, I've been to his grave 4 times. The first time was to take a picture of the marker you see up in the top right. The second time I had read that the family had decided he needed a more baseball oriented marker. That other one was just boring, so they decided to put in a new one. And so I went to take a picture of the new one, but it wasn't there. So at that point, he was in an unmarked grave. I did not put up a picture of that. And then I went back to get a picture of the new marker. So you see the thing on the left that says McGinnity. And it turns out I had to go back one more time because I hadn't bothered to look at the back of the marker and see the cool pictures on the back of the marker there. I've gotten much better about looking at backs of markers to see if there are things on the back that are interesting to me. But that is what I have about Oklahoma graves. There are others, but like I said, about 40 or 50 of them are minor leaguers that other than, well, none of you probably ever heard of Roy Deal, but to me, that one was important. But that's what I
Thank you,
do.
Fred. Yeah, that that was really cool. I'm glad you brought up the Caminiti one because we're me and the missus are planning a trip to Texas and we're driving out there. And I always like to when I'm going on trips, like, oh, is there anything of interest on the way or there? And Caminiti popped up and it's like, oh, buried on his ranch. I'm like, well, that's a no go. But you
Yeah.
got Biggio to help you out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like I got Biggio to help me. I have a friend who's good friends with Biggio, and he got Biggio to help me. I never actually communicated directly with Craig Biggio, but I've had other times where people took pictures for me. Harmon Killebrew's widow took the pictures that I have of his marker because when I was up in Payette, Idaho, it was not yet marked. So that's another one where I had somebody help me out. But I'll be up once I get to my West Coast trip. I'll be up that area, so I may stop by there again.
And it is also my intention. I have a list of all those Hall of Famers that you ended with of eventually getting to those. Like I've run across some of them, but I've got a working list at least of the Hall of Famers. I don't know if I'll ever be as ambitious to get some of those other ones, but that's definitely on my list to try to get knocked out.
Well, I'm
Now that the
sufficiently
weather's going to be
OCD
nice.
that I do that. If I start collecting something, by golly, I want to collect it.
Understandable. Yeah. Well, we still have a little bit of time before like they because obviously with it being Sabre Day, they want to try to limit these meetings to 2 hours, so we've still got plenty of time. Um, what I wanted to discuss is mainly for the purposes of Big Sabre, what they want chapter leaders to do on a yearly basis is have at least one Zoom and one in-person meeting during each 12-month window. So the end of that would be the end of June. So what I'm aiming for is an in-person meeting sometime around April or May, probably. I know multiple things have been posted on the Facebook group about the Negro Leagues exhibit in Enid or that exhibit in Tulsa. Those certainly were options to me, considering I was also thinking perhaps an OU baseball game or a Dodgers game or a Drillers game. Since I've got a fair number, and especially the frequent flyers who are at almost every meeting, I wanted to save the end of the meeting to reserve for that, for feeling out the room, seeing what if anyone had a preference for any of those ideas, or to throw in a new idea. I'll always open up the floor to anyone else before I suggest anything of my own. So with that, I'll yield it to you all.
I
Really
would
need to
vote
go
for
back to
April
Tulsa.
for the date.
Really need to go back to Tulsa. It's been a long time.
No, I 100% agree with that. Yeah, it has, and April would work for me. That would be fine.
Yeah, because May I'll be on my way to New York.
Okay.
Now that'll be the second half of May, but so if it were early May, I could do it, but second half of May I'll be chasing dead people.
It might
All
be
right.
interesting to go around if we go to Tulsa to go around and visit all the old ballpark locations.
Yeah, they've
Yes, we
preserved
could
most
visit
of
the
those.
graves of major leaguers.
They preserved most of the locations, at least of those, haven't they? Oklahoma City. I can show you where the old Texas League ballpark was. But the all sports stadium's been torn down. Fairgrounds wanted it back, I think. And they just haven't done a good job. History hasn't been good to us. But I got my memories.
Prime real estate, people want to use that. They don't want to leave it for something that's a dusty old museum, only interesting to people like us.
Yeah, even a marker, they have a plaque on something that says it was located here would be nice.
Yeah.
like I say, I could find the old ballpark, the Texas League Park, because it's across the street from a city water plant, but it's warehouses. And the things I remember about it, particularly the garage door billboard out behind left field that kept opening and closing the garage door. Things like that you don't forget. And you mentioned Joe Frazier here earlier hit a ball off the top of a scoreboard over, I don't know how high it was, 2-level scoreboard fence in right field, and that big scoreboard above it. He hit one off the top of it for a double.
In some,
minor
yeah,
league.
in some places, even though they tear it down, they put some recognition, like in Pittsburgh, you can go visit home plate at Forbes Field. Now, Forbes Field isn't there, but home plate is.
Home plate is also right field, left field wall.
Yeah, part of the wall's still up.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. But and home plate, I think, is in the front of a store of some kind, like a furniture store or something. I think I could be imagining things.
One spot that's interesting if when you're back east is I never would have found this on my own, but somebody recommended it. I took a motorcycle trip back east this summer, and when I was in Pittsburgh, there's a museum there called the Karpeles Museum, Karpeles. This was a rich old guy that was a paper collector. And I don't mean untyped paper, but just paper, things printed on books. But they have a bunch of old scorecards there too.
Oh, wow.
I mean, really early ones. So, and apparently there's 4 or 5 of these museums around the country. I don't know if they all have scorecards or not. There's one in Florida, one in Texas, one in Pittsburgh. The one in Pittsburgh is the main one, I think. But if you're in Pittsburgh, it's worth a trip. It's in an old church in a really bad part of town. You know, you might want a bulletproof vest or something.
I wasn't too. I was in Pittsburgh for about a week. Got 200 graves, and I didn't see any parts that made me feel particularly. I mean, I grew up in New York City, so I may have a different standard for.
Yeah.
Now, some parts of Baltimore or Detroit, yeah, that's. But I don't remember seeing anything in Pittsburgh that had me too concerned for my safety.
I think there was
I like
one.
the idea of Tulsa in either ballparks or graves or something like that. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, and I think we could probably that does sound like a good idea, something to sort of roll together. Because I think there was something that Kevin had presented a while back on once the Negro Leagues became the major leagues, then there became a couple of ballparks that became quote unquote, major league ballparks once the decision came down. And I think one of them was in Tulsa. So that was one that popped up. Kevin, if you can confirm that, I think, was that right?
Oh yeah. There was some games, not many, but some in Tulsa. But Muskogee was the bigger one probably that became major league. The old minor league park in Muskogee had quite a few Negro League games played there, major Negro League games. So those two definitely. And we have the various minor league parks that have been in Tulsa. You could almost have a walking tour, downtown between not very far from the current stadium, right? That you could walk around and see that right down the street here was one of the parks, from 1910, and because they're all in that area except for the ones that were at the fairgrounds, which are the more modern ones. Until they built the newest one back downtown. But the two prior to that were out at the fairgrounds. So those two would not be walking distance from downtown, but yeah, the sites we know where they are, right? So you could definitely do a tour of old ballpark sites. Although most of them don't have any marker at all, right? So you'd be looking at a parking lot or
Use your imagination, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of them is a big home store, right? Not Lowe's, but the other one. I can't even think of what it is.
The Home Depot.
Home Depot. Yeah, one of them's a Home Depot now. One of the McNulty Park is now a Home Depot. But yeah, you'd be looking at that, but it'd still be interesting, I think.
Does
Oh
Joe
yeah.
Fraser? Does Joe Fraser's son live anywhere near Tulsa?
Yeah, he lives not. I don't think he's very far from me. He's here in Broken Arrow somewhere.
Yeah, he lives along on the golf course in Broken Arrow.
Okay,
Okay,
yeah.
so
So
that
he's
might
just
be
a few miles from me.
so it'd be
And
convenient for him to come visit with us if we did do Tulsa.
Yes.
yeah, so I also have the
He's a
this
Seattle
one-
Mariners fan, if you don't hold that against him.
Oh, yeah. This would probably have to wait to next SABR Day, but I also have the manager of the Tennessee Smokies, who is a Broken Arrow. I don't think he's actually been announced yet. The Cubs are probably in the next week or so will announce their new manager lineup for the minor leagues. But the manager of the Tennessee Smokies is a Broken Arrow native. And he's a son of one of my friends. So I've got him to line up sometime. I think he would be a really good guest for us, but he's about to head to Arizona in another 2 weeks or whatever, and he won't be available probably in May because he'll be busy with the season. But I thought he might actually be able to join today, but he wasn't able to. But and the other guest I have, which we can get probably any time, but he would have to be a Zoom meeting and not on site, is Dan Evans, who was the general manager of the Dodgers, assistant general manager, I think, at the White Sox. He's been a lot of other things. Anyway, I got to meet him at the SABR convention this year in Chicago. He happens to be a ballparks guy, and since I'm a ballparks guy, we kind of hit it off a little bit. And if you don't know, he's involved in the Field of Dreams development, where they're developing the site there. He's kind of running that. And that's where Frank Thomas is like one of the major investors. Frank Thomas, the former White Sox, the Hall of Famer. So he kind of works for Frank Thomas now in a way. But anyway, he's been a scout, and he's spent like 40 years of his life in baseball, and even though he's still not that old, really, he started very young. So I think he would be an excellent guest for us to have on one of the Zoom calls.
In Arkansas, one time, for a while we were meeting more regularly because Zoom became a real convenient way to meet. And one time we had Sam McDowell.
Yeah, I was in on that one. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I enjoyed that a lot, especially when his biographer would shut up and let him talk. His biographer seemed to think he knew Sam McDowell's story better than Sam McDowell did, and McDowell actually politely sort of told him to shut up at one point so he could talk. But he was a lot of fun. I enjoyed him a lot. And I don't remember how I got in touch with him, but I'm pretty sure I could figure it out again.
That's what.
And there's a bunch of authors too, right? That we could have.
Oh, they're always sending me stuff.
Okay, yeah, they want to be on the call, so
yeah.
And most of the ones I know have written Negro League books, so I figured we'd kind of beat the Negro Leagues to death the last few years. So I'm trying to do other things, like the Dan Evans thing, I think would be.
Yeah, that was one you'd email me about, and I'm all on board for that. And with the Tennessee Smokies, I mean, I know where that ballpark is. That's just a hop, skip, and a jump from my hometown. And I went to Bill Meyer Stadium, was the old stadium before they built the new one out in Kodak. But yeah, I've been to my fair share of Knoxville Smokies games, so I would be all on board if we could do that. Yeah, and I've made a note for next SABR Day. So
we
yeah,
went
that
to a minor league game in Tennessee one time where there's a big bluff or cliff behind the outfield fence. Is that the Smokies or is that somebody else?
Probably Chattanooga.
it's got to
Could
be
be.
either Chattanooga or the Smokies. The Smokies ballpark, the new one, is in Kodak, which is about halfway between Knoxville and the Smoky Mountain National Park. Chattanooga's, at least the old one, is kind of overlooks. It could be either one. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I actually plan on going this summer to the Smokies game. We're gonna go after I go to the Hall of Fame in June. That's the first big trip for me. It just so happens the Negro League Conference is in Cooperstown this year, so I'm finally going to get to see the Hall of Fame. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, my trip there for Emmett Ashford's grave will be the first time I've ever been in Cooperstown. I'm looking forward to that.
I had a great time. I was there right before Roland was inducted, so there were lots of Cardinals jerseys, and I also am a fan of James Fenimore Cooper, so I got a double.
Yeah, there's that statue of him like right across the street. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been to the Hall of Fame a handful of times. Last time I was there, they were scheduling people. They were still in their COVID scheduling. And so I got the earliest time there. And I had my wife and my sister and her husband. But I was like, why don't you guys hold up here for a minute? Look at all these paintings. And so I got to walk into like the plaque gallery all by myself. Just have it there for a second.
That's what, when I went about, was a year and a half ago, we were the first ones in the door, and probably among some of the last to leave. I made a day out of it, but yeah, it's plan accordingly, that to make a day out of it. If you go, it's well worth it. We were there for like 6 hours and I still missed some stuff. So yeah,
Oh yeah, from what I understand, you can spend all the time that you have there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And really, to me, the plaque area is almost the least interesting area, because almost everything that's on the plaques I already know.
Mm-hmm.
But the other displays are just fascinating. Some of the early scorecards, and one of my favorite parts of it was that place where they have like, not statues exactly, but like some of the early fans, like the lady with the cowbell and the I can't remember their names, but
Hilda.
Yeah.
There's 3 or 4 of them there in one display of like super fans, and that's fascinating.
Most interesting thing I saw there, to me, was some scorebooks they kept by a newspaper guy in Philadelphia, and they would fit in his breast pocket, that size, cigarette size, package size. And he's kept score on those things. And after you blow them up, you could read them. As I did a few of those for SABR, for Retro Sheet, back a few years ago. And I had done them all because Dave Smith had given me a blown up copy, obviously. And when I saw what they were, I had trouble believing it. I don't see how anyone could write that way, as with a little stub pencil you get anyway to do a story.
Yeah, that pencil needs to be thrown away. That's only useful for spreading mustard on your hot dog. But I was been reading recently about Henry Chadwick's scoring system, and it's a little wonky because he uses the fielders' positions in the lineup to indicate their numbers as fielding things. So like if he doesn't, the right fielder is not number 9. The right fielder if he bats third, is number 3.
Okay.
So like if there's a 3-4 double play, that doesn't mean first base to second base. That means like whoever is third in the lineup to whoever's fourth in the lineup. I don't think I'm going to adopt that anytime soon. But what I did like was he also used at a slightly later stage, like when you're counting for bases, like, okay, a runner gets to first. He goes from first to second on a single to right field. I traditionally wrote that down as I just wrote a 9 in there to indicate that's where the hit had gone that moved him along. But he used the player in the lineup's position. So if it was the number 1 batter and the number 2 batter advanced, you'd write a 2 there. I think that's actually a better system than I'm using. I'm going to switch. But
well, I know I'm going to want to go to the plaque that I had some part in playing in the changing of the plaque. There are 2 plaques that have been recast, Roberto Clemente and Pete Hill. And I was involved, a small part of the research that was done to figure out all the things they had wrong about Pete Hill, so that they ended up redoing that plaque. So I'm definitely going to make sure I go to that one.
is that like his birth date or something? Or
Almost everything. The only things that we knew about him that were right were that he died in Buffalo and he'd been a porter on the railroad. Everything else was wrong. The death year was right, but we were off by 2 weeks on the actual date.
I think my favorite thing about the plaque gallery is, at least it was there when I went, like right as you enter, right off to the right, there's like this little note that says like, this, not all of this information is correct. It was correct at the time of when the plaques were made. So I'm sure they probably got sick of pedantic people like myself going in there and being like, actually, it's not that, yeah. So
does it say Ty Cobb has 4,191 hits?
Yeah, that was one of them that I noticed. Hack Wilson's season
191 RBIs.
There were a couple that I noticed, but I went about living my life and just kind of made a mental note. But I'm sure that they probably got a lot of people like myself who were like, I need to talk to somebody here. But yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure they hate people like that. I was at the Truman Memorial in Independence, and they had his itinerary in when he was running for re-election, and they had misspelled Bonita, Oklahoma. And I pointed that out to them, and they wrote down my name real nicely. And about 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the director of the museum who said, "You're right, of course, but that's the way it's spelled on his original itinerary, so we're going to leave it." And I thought, okay, whatever,
I'm looking forward to going to the broadcasters wing of the Hall of Fame to look at that. There are 2 different graves I've been to that falsely claim somebody's in the Hall of Fame. Harry Callis, broadcaster for the Phillies, it says he's in the Hall of Fame. He's not. And Sue Kidd, who played in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, she's buried in Arkansas, and it says inducted, or it says Baseball Hall of Fame 19, whatever year they put the display up for the league. And they treat on her grave marker, they treated that as though she was inducted in the Hall of Fame, which she was not.
Yeah, the difference between being in the museum and being in the Hall of Fame is one that is not obvious to people that haven't been there. Pete Rose is in the museum; he's just not in the Hall of Fame.
And all the broadcasters, they're in that wing. Like, they're not like Harry Carey and Bob Uecker aren't inducted into the Hall of Fame. But if you go into that wing there, you can see their stuff.
Annual award. Those are the people who are there.
Yeah. If you go on YouTube, though, you can find a video. Yeah, you can find a video on YouTube that was put up there by Major League Baseball that says this is Bob Uecker's induction speech into the Hall of Fame. So the person from Major League Baseball got it wrong.
And that's one of the funniest things you'll ever see. Every now and then I like to
he's a
rewatch
funny guy.
That. Yeah.
He is a funny guy. There's no doubt about that.
Just recently had his 90th birthday. Good for him.
Mm-hmm. I remember in that speech where he said they'd come to his house and say they'd like he's like a $5,000 signing bonus, and his dad says, "I don't think we can afford that much."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one. SABR had a book about 10 years ago about broadcasters. It was quite a good book. I really enjoyed reading it. A lot of forgotten broadcasters that worked for many, many years.
One thing disappoints me is so far I don't think know where Vin Scully is buried. That is one I would like to. I mean, I'll do broadcasters if I could find out where they are. And he is, if you're going to visit a broadcaster, he's the one you want to visit, because he was, I don't know, at least in my experience, probably the best ever.
I was one time on YouTube. I tried to find what's the oldest surviving radio broadcast of a baseball game, and according to what I found, which may not be right, it's on that you can listen to today. That was on YouTube. It was a Detroit Tigers game, and the broadcaster was what was his name?
Ernie
Tripp.
Harwell?
Yeah, no, not Larry Harwell, because this is like in the 1930s.
Okay.
Like 1934. And the guy was not only broadcasting the game, he was the official stadium announcer and was covering the game for a newspaper. And he did a great job. I mean, I just thought I listen. You can go on YouTube and put in Detroit Tigers oldest game on YouTube. It's just a radio broadcast. It's not TV, of course. But it's entertaining game too. I sat there and listened to the whole game. I guess that's pretty nerdy, but I could admit that in this crowd.
Oh, I'm guilty of the same thing, of putting on old games on as background noise while I'm doing other stuff. Yeah, I have a list that I'll go to. Be like, oh, it's time for Game 7 of the 2004 ALCS again. Never get tired of that one. Yeah.
What was that guy's name? Yeah, I've gone back.
Jesse, you mentioned earlier, as a change of subject, if you don't want to change it, I'll defer. You mentioned if it was on Baseball Reference, it was okay, and you would take their word for it. I got them to change 2 high school graduation
Oh, for real?
things there. Had Bobby Morgan, journeyman infielder in the National League in the 50s, and Frank Kellert. He was a very short time major leaguer, but is famous for being in the picture when Jackie Robinson stole home in the 1952 World Series, whichever World Series it was, heavy 55. But anyway, they had them listed as graduating from Northwest Classen High School in Oklahoma City. Northwest Classen didn't exist until after these guys had been major league players. They were both from Classen High School. And I wrote them, told them what I thought about it, and also had found a Classen High School yearbook for 1944, 43, whenever it was, 44, I guess, and found Morgan's picture in there. They changed it. I never heard any more again, but the next time I went to those pages, they had altered that. So they listen. Yeah. They listen.
I've sent them a couple of changes about. I'm sure it was about Graves. That's one thing I feel pretty comfortable about telling somebody they're wrong, because I know those better than most. I know those better than most people do.
If you've got photographic evidence too, and
yeah. Right. As long as you have evidence, they'll change it. Their data provider is very picky though, because I know him personally, so Ted Turasi, who's a SABR member, is their data guy. They contract him, and he won't change anything unless there's documentation, though, because
this one
people write in and say, "Oh, you need to change this," and then a week later, somebody else will write in, "Oh, you've got this wrong. Why'd you change it?" And so you have to have documentation. I've had a lot of things like
this one I sent in was pretty obvious since the high school wasn't there at the time.
Well, high schools, a lot of the high school data is going to be not right, because that is really hard. I worked on that data set before they incorporated it, for SABR, before they incorporated into the Baseball Reference. And I didn't really do research. What I did was try to get the high school. Okay, Roosevelt High School, this guy went to in this city is the same as Theodore Roosevelt High School for this guy, tried to get the names all the same, and it was a mess. So there's a lot of them that are not right, but it's a lot better than it used to be. But
Well,
that
yeah.
they'll probably change without too much trouble because they know the data is suspect in some cases.
Yeah, I've told Retro Sheet about some mistakes they had. They have two guys in St. Mary's Cemetery, except on one of them they have it as SAINT Mary Cemetery, and one they have ST period Mary Cemetery. Well, it's the same cemetery. And another place where there's problems with those is where the cemetery is, especially in metropolitan areas. Because are they in this city or are they in this neighborhood? And you get into New York, you've got the boroughs, you've got the neighborhoods, you've got all these different names, and it's hard to find out that these two are in the same cemetery. Just don't know which is the actual right designation for where it is.
Yeah, and then you have the minor league players, which is another mess. Bob Johnson, who played for Nashville in 1944, and Robert Johnson, who played for Chattanooga in 1938. Are they the same guy or not? It's like, oh my gosh.
Well, there's a guy who played Major League Ball named Charlie Wilson, and he's buried up in Rochester, New York. And I contacted somebody for that cemetery to get some information about him, and she said, "Oh, by the way, his son was a ball player too. He played for the Milwaukee Brewers. Now, he died in 1969, so obviously he didn't play for the Major League Milwaukee Brewers. But he's in Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, so you might want to try to visit him too." Well, his son did not play. As far as people who are much better at doing biographical research than I am have concluded, he did not. Junior may have played semi-pro. He may have had a tryout for somebody, but he didn't play for any professional team.
Yeah,
I spent a little time.
I saw you posted that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I went and tried to find it. I couldn't find the guy. Yeah.
I spent a little time digging around once trying to figure out if Eisenhower actually had played semi-pro baseball up in Abilene, Kansas, before he went to West Point. And he played under, supposedly, he admitted in a book published right after World War II that he did, but he gave some kind of contradictory information about the name he used and the position he played. And there were two guys with the same name, and they were all playing under assumed names anyway. So I just think sometimes you just kind of got to say, well, who knows, for sure. But
I did play on probably one of the same fields that the first President Bush played on. Because when I was in 9th grade, I went to the boarding school that he had attended and graduated from. And I played baseball there. He played baseball there. We know he played baseball there because he played at Yale. And so I probably played on one of the same fields that he played on. Not that that means anything other than personal amusement, perhaps, but
It's all in our story. That's my story.
that's exactly
And
right.
yours.
My story, and I'm sticking with it.
As Dan Jenkins wrote in the book Baja, Oklahoma, this wife finds her husband cheating on her, and she says, "Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?"
All right. Well, we're getting up against it, and I just wanted to sort of wrap up what we were going for a future meeting here. I've been taking notes. What I'm looking at then is April or early May, something in Tulsa for a sort of a walking tour of those that are available, and then perhaps
Jesse?
Yes,
Just taking a look at the driller schedule, if we wanted to kind of piggyback on a walking tour ball game.
Sure.
They are home the weekend of the 13th and the 27th
of April.
Of April, yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Great.
All right, I will put that together, and I will probably send out an email to the group at large for more suggestions, especially for those of you who live in Tulsa. I think I've been there 3 times in my life, so I will probably need some other people there to assist with that. But in the meantime, I'll do a little more research on that, see what I can do in terms of grave sites that are in that area that might be of interest to us. and at some point in the next month or so, get that hammered out and formalized, and then that will be our next meeting, so that we can A, go to Tulsa, and B, placate Big Saber, since we're having an in-person meeting. Thank you all for attending this one. This was really great, Fred. Again, another great presentation. It was great talking with y'all, and I will be in touch for our next meeting. Take it
Real
easy, guys.
quickly, if any of you do ever want to visit any of the graves, I can make it a whole lot easier for you. Let me know who you're interested in. I can send you the GPS coordinates so you can plug them into Google Maps so you can find out exactly where to go. I can save you a lot of walking.
Well, then, yeah, when I get around to that, to the ones in Oklahoma, I will shoot you an email then. That would be great.
That'll work.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
All right.
Thanks.
See you.
Thanks.
See ya.
Bye.